welcome back. This is Module 2 in the Raise Your Word Count course, and this is Lesson 1. And we're going to talk about the things that get in our way when it comes to getting our books written. I just want to do an overview of the types of problems that you might be encountering, the myths that occur around creativity, and then in the rest of the course we're going to bust those myths and solve the problems that you might be having. So there are two truths about writing: that if you want to get a book written, you need to do two things. You need to get your bum in your chair for as much time as you've got allotted on any given day, and you need to get the words down onto the paper or onto the digital screen these days, as that's what we're usually doing. So what that means is that if you're having trouble writing, you really only have one of two problems. You either have a bum and chair problem or you have a typing problem, and that's it. So whatever excuse or reason or justification that you give to yourself or to anyone else about why you're not getting your writing done, it only ever boils down to one of those two problems. It's really simple. And then what we're going to talk about more in this course is that it actually gets even more simpler than that. It's really, those two things are caused both by the same singular problem, which is our thinking, what's going on between our ears. So that's what the difference about this course from perhaps other writing courses that you've encountered is, that we're really going to focus on the nature of your thought and how that creates the other problems that you encounter when you're trying to get your words down on the paper. So one of the things I want to talk about in this overview lesson is the myth of flow state and how that can get in our way when we're creative people. So what do I mean when I talk about flow state? What I mean is that sometimes writers and other creative people will talk about the way that when they're writing, the words just are sort of flowing through them, and the characters are speaking, and the characters are taking the story in a direction that's unexpected, or things like ideas are sort of almost coming to them faster than they can write them down. And it's almost like that magical place where time disappears and the writing becomes effortless and easy. And I absolutely agree that that state exists, but what happens is that when we have an expectation that that's all that writing should be, that gets in our way. Because what we're not seeing is that 95% of the time, those writers are probably grinding it out. They're showing up even when they don't want to. And in order for that flow state to show up and occur within us, we need to do the work of putting our bum in our chair. So I just want to mention a resource here. If you haven't read Elizabeth Gilbert's book, Big Magic, I highly recommend it. In the book, she talks about how the myth of the struggling and suffering artist is really unnecessary, and that creativity wants to come and play with us. And her reasoning goes that, so whatever creativity is, whatever that energy is that's out there in the world or in the universe, in the ethers, it can't come into being. It can't come into form unless we participate, we the creative people. It needs us to show up because it has no way of coming into the world, as I said, unless we bring it into form. So in that way, creativity is joyful and it's precious, and it can be full of fun. It doesn't have to be full of suffering. So I wanted to mention that at the outset here as well. So I think there is such a thing as the flow state. There is some sort of magic and divinity, whatever word you want to use, about creativity. But there's also this paradox. And the paradox exists in that writing is also hard work. So it is magic, but it's also hard work. So I'm going to do another little book recommendation here. If you've never heard of Steven Pressfield, I highly recommend reading The War of Art, and also Turning Pro. That's another of his books. And Steven Pressfield talks about writing as being a blue-collar occupation. And if you've ever seen him interviewed, he does this thing where he wears, on his feet, he's always got construction boots on, those sort of yellowy beige, steel-toed construction boots. So he can be, he can be in a suit and tie and a jacket, but he'll have those construction boots on his feet. And the reason he does that is to remind himself that writing is a blue-collar occupation, that we need to show up in our chairs daily, if possible, and get our writing done. And this is the paradox that I want to talk about. Writing and creativity are magical. They are magical things that occur. We're creating something out of nothing. But the flip side of that is that in order to occasionally achieve that flow state that does occur, where the characters take over the story and the writing happens effortlessly, we have to show up and do our work in order to make that happen. So very often the things that gets in our way of getting our bum in our chair and getting our writing done, when we encounter that bum and chair and typing problem, the thing that's getting in our way is that we have an expectation that magical flow state should exist before we actually sit down. And that just isn't the way it's going to work. We can sit around waiting for inspiration for decades. There's just something about creativity that it needs to know that we're there in our chair doing the work on a regular basis before it can show up. And certainly there are times, in the creative world when somebody suddenly has an inspirational idea and a book gets written really quickly. But I think those are the exception to the rule. So you may have heard some or all of this before, and this kind of, just put your bum in your chair attitude and the writing will get written. And so, but what I wanted to point out, that the difference in this course about raising your word count is that we're really going to talk about the nature of your thinking. So I talked at the beginning of this lesson about how those two problems, the bum and chair problem and the typing problem, actually really boil down to a thinking problem. And that's a big part of what we're going to cover in this course. We're going to talk about the nature of your thinking, and we're going to talk about how it can impede you, but we're also going to talk about the things that will help you to shift your view of that thinking. What I'm going to do is create a slight gap between, a little bit of space between you and your thoughts, so that you're able to see them for what they are, and then that will enable you to get your bum in your chair and get your typing done much more easily. So in the next lesson, lesson 2 in this module, I just want to talk about very quickly about how writing is a marathon and not a sprint, because I don't want you to take the lessons from this course and injure yourself. I just want to make sure that you are prepared and learn a little bit about the muscle building nature of becoming a consistent writer. So let's jump in there and talk about that. See you in the next lesson.